This is Kelly Lanning from Houston, Texas, hanging out with Ellery Wells from the Empowered Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm really excited about today's guest. I found Tom the very first time when he had contributed an article. I think it was either to Forbes or entrepreneur.com. I tracked back to his website, loved what he was doing, saw that he had written a fantastic book that I can't wait to read, and I want to share his story and the results of his book with you today. Today's guest, Tom Corley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ellery. Thanks for having me on your show.
You're welcome. And you said my name right when I asked that question. I was like, I hope he says my name right. So I appreciate that.
Not a problem. This isn't my first rodeo.
Awesome. Well, let's start off with the bang. Tom, what is the number one rich habit? Can you boil it down to one, or is it too complex?
Yeah, there's two very close at the very top of the rich habits heap. And I would say the daily self-education is probably the most important.
I like that.
That's probably the most important rich habit. And I also think that the rich habit of where you're developing strong relationships, and by that I mean surrounding yourself with the right people. I call them rich relationships. That's equally as important, because those rich relationships open up doors that wouldn't be open otherwise.
Oh, those are perfect. And I want to dive back into those here in a second. And those are great. I'm glad we started with those. But Tom, I want to, on your about page, which for everyone, if you're out there at your computer, go to richhabits.net. And I went over to Tom's about page, and the very first line, Tom says, you understand the difference between being rich and being poor, because at age 9 your family went from being multimillionaires to being broke in just one night. I want you to talk about that process, because I think so many people get I had a guest on my show. Her name is Marley Ward, and she gave me the concept of these golden handcuffs. We're making a lot of money, we're being successful, and we want to hold on to it so tightly, and then maybe something happens, like with your family, and hopefully it's okay that we talk about it, but something happens and we lose it. But you've been able to build a successful business out of the ashes of this. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's an amazing story. It's a story really of resilience on the part of my father, persistence. But what I guess makes me different from a lot of people out there is that I started out in life wealthy, very wealthy, one of the wealthiest families on Staten Island, or one of the wealthier families. And we lost it all overnight when my father's warehouse burned down. And in those days, Ellery, they didn't have insurance like they do today. They had insurance, but it didn't cover everything. And so, my father spent 18 months in court trying to get money, squeeze money out of insurers and other individuals that owed him money. But one of the, what you hear a lot, and I know this because I've interviewed a lot of poor people. When you grow up poor, you're poor, but you don't really think of yourself as poor, because you're usually surrounded by other poor people. The demographic you're in is usually the same. So you're all kind of the same. You're in the same boat, and you're not exposed to certain things that would open up your eyes. Well, my eyes were opened up when, in the inverse, when I saw what it was like to be poor. And I'll tell you what, it's an itch that can't be scratched. And it stayed with me, that itch, through my whole life. And I'm grateful that for a couple of people in my life that got me on the right track while we were going through all this. And one was an 8th grade teacher who, a lot of the individuals in my family, when you lose money, there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of stress now just paying the bills. And so we had 8 in my family, and we all struggled a little bit after that. I particularly struggled in school. And then someone just changed my belief system about who I was. I wasn't a failure, wasn't a stupid kid, and became almost a straight A student after that. So I think like back on those days and how important it is to have the right people around you, even when you're poor, because they can elevate you and lift you up. And that one person helped me get on the right path, which was a path of self-education, of devoting myself to educating myself on my own. And it's probably that and exercise, probably the only two rich habits that I had. I really didn't have many. My dad did try and infuse us with certain principles, but he was never around because he was working 2 or 3 jobs trying to keep 8 mouths fed or 10 mouths fed. So yeah, it was a traumatic thing, and I don't think it's anything that you can where you can say, "Oh, I've been there." A lot of people are poor, and a lot of people are rich. I don't know many people. I certainly not in my circle that were wealthy and then became poor. And then, my father got back on track he had some rich habits, and he was able to retire a millionaire.
Can I ask you a question about the word you're using? Because poor, there's never, I read a comment somewhere and it says, rich people have never been more hated and admired at basically the same time.
Yeah.
I hate the rich people. They just have money and the rich keep getting richer and whatever. But people who say that want to be rich so bad, but poor seems to have, I've said it in social media and things like that. I'm like, well, I'm not poor. Money isn't everything, and that goes back to mindset, which I know you're big on. But it also like, well, money's not everything, or we've got enough to get by. What do you think of the word poor? Is it accurate? Is it demeaning? What?
Yeah, I mean, in my just so that we can lay the groundwork in my study, the poor people they had to have two things. It was a conjunctive test. They had to make less than $35,000 a year, and they had to have less than $5,000 in liquid savings. So if you had those two things, you were poor.
And I'm not saying people in general should not use the word poor, but it's just like, would you agree it's kind of one of those things where people, they don't want to be called poor? Well, I'm lower SES, socioeconomic status, or
there's definitely a negative connotation associated with it. I found that out when I got Dave Ramsey, who's a big third largest radio host in the nation. He interviewed me, and then that was in July of last year, and then in December he posted one of the articles I had written, which was 20 things that the rich people do every day that poor people don't.
That was you? I saw that and I filed it away, and I was gonna try to do a blog post on about each one of those things. I had no idea that was you, but so that's the third time, Tom. Whenever I come across somebody's book or podcast or something for the third time, I just feel it's a sign I need to connect with them. So I saw Dave's thing, I saw your thing on Entrepreneur, and then I heard you on James Kinson's Cash Car Convert. So that's the 3 things right there. So I'm even more excited and honored to be able to talk with you.
Well, I appreciate that. That's nice of you to say. But the thing about it is, my whole motivation in doing this study was because one of my small business clients, who was in business for 30 years, was on the verge of bankruptcy. He ended up filing for bankruptcy. But he met with me one night and he broke down and started crying. And I think this was back in 2004. And he just looked at me, Ellery, and he said, "What am I doing wrong? What are wealthy people doing? What are your successful clients doing that I'm not doing?" And the power in his emotion triggered emotion on my part. Watching him break down, this big burly guy, and start crying and weeping, it really, I almost broke down. And I remember going home and talking to my wife that night, and I said, you know what? I always get the clients when they're successful. Usually, that's a CPA. Usually has successful clients, upper middle class clients for the most part, to rich. So I don't get to see them rise. I don't get to see them go from poor or middle class to wealthy and successful. So that's when I started doing the research. And I found that there, other than the Millionaire Next Door, there really wasn't any data on what it is that wealthy people do every day. What I wanted to uncover was two things. One was, what is it that wealthy people do from the minute that they put their feet on the floor in the morning to the minute that they put their heads on the pillow? And I also wanted to know what poor people are doing, because Ellery, it's one thing to say, oh, this is, what wealthy people do to be successful. That's all well and good, but that's just one side of the coin. If you don't know what you're doing wrong, then you might continue those old habits, not knowing that they're really damaging you and leading you down the wrong path. So I looked at it from both sides. I said, I want to know what works and what doesn't work in terms of your daily activities, your behaviors, and your choices. And so that's why the study took so long. It took 5 years of researching 233 wealthy people and 128 poor. And what I found was really a divide that was the size of the Atlantic Ocean separating Europe from North America. I mean, it was that big of a difference. And I realized I had stumbled onto something really big. And so I've been, it's kind of changed my life, and not only do I follow some of the rich habits, I mean, I lost 41 pounds.
Wow.
And that to me is the most tangible development. I've also increased my wealth. I've got my kids through college. It would have never happened. Honestly, it would have never happened if it wasn't for the rich habits, because it helped me grow my financial planning practice. So there's no question. There's no doubt in my mind that whatever your circumstances are, let's say you're poor, your circumstances are poverty, they're temporary, but they're made permanent by our daily habits. I'm convinced of that.
Tom, would you agree with this statement? Because I hear it on the radio. I heard it just earlier this week, and every time I hear the first half of this, I fill it in with the second half. And let me know if you agree with the whole thing. The rich keep getting richer, and I always say because the rich keep doing the things that made them rich, and the poor keep getting or doing the things that keep them poor. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that is actually a great way to summarize the rich habits, because the wealthy people I found, primarily from their parents, they were mentored with certain, in the Jewish community, they call them traditions, and other cultures call them other things. But in America, they're really success habits, I guess you would say. And so the wealthy families, and it doesn't have to be wealthy families, but it has to be parents that raise wealthy children. Though, because a lot of the individuals in my study didn't necessarily come from wealthy households, but their parents taught them certain success principles that they knew would work, but they couldn't apply it to their own lives, because it's hard when you're 50 years old or 45 years old to change everything that you're doing about your life, because you have all these old responsibilities that are associated with raising a family. So you kind of boxed in a little bit. So they wanted their kids to be successful in life, so they taught them certain things, and these kids grew up to be wealthy, successful adults. Now, all of them said, I learned most of what I know, I learned from my parents. There's really 5 places five ways to become successful or find a success mentor. One is your parents, and parents are often the only shot any of us have at having a mentor in life. The second place is from our teachers. The third place is from a career mentor, someone you stumble into in work that, helps mentor you to be successful. The fourth way is through books. You can, every book you read, every success book, every self-help book, every biography of a successful person could be a mentor. And then there's the great thing about America, the School of Hard Knocks. You can start your own company, and you could learn the hard way what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I interviewed a girl named Laurel Staples, and she talked about how she had a business that failed, and she lost $100,000 and things like that. And I was driving home one evening telling my wife about Laurel's story, and I was thinking, how much did she learn from, if you just called it an education tax or whatever, how much did Laurel learn through this process of spending instead of losing, call it spending $100,000 versus what someone at a business school would get for their $100,000. And I'm not anti, and to paraphrase Einstein, I'm not against schooling. I'm for education. And you mentioned Hard Knocks, and that story popped into my head is, try and fail instead of necessarily going and sitting in a classroom and being taught theory.
Yeah, I mean, when you learn, when you fail and make mistakes through the School of Hard Knocks, which is, starting a business, the lessons that you learn are like railroad tracks on the brain, because it not only when you're going through the mistakes and the failure, does it trigger a lot of emotions, which is the key for thoughts to become memories. You trigger all of these emotions and all of this anxiety, and you really learn best through the School of Hard Knocks. It's the hardest way to learn. That's why my follow-up book to Rich Habits is Rich Kids: How to Raise Our Children to Be Happy and Successful in Life, and that's coming out in July. That book is really tailored towards parents, grandparents, and teachers, because they're the first line of defense in helping kids to become successful without having to go through the trauma of the School of Hard Knocks. That's really was my purpose of writing that book.
Is that one you had mentioned that, as kids, or a lot of people have their parents as one of the only places they get mentors, and you said a second ago about the rich people that you studied, they got a lot of their information from their parents. Is that information that they got 20, 30, 40 years ago? How is that coming into the Rich Kids book?
Yeah, it's all part of the Rich Kids book. The difference between, I guess, Rich Kids and Rich Habits is I tried to summarize all of the 200 plus activities, behaviors, and choices that the wealthy people make, and into 10 core habits that you could follow. The Rich Kids book is more of the detailed strategies, like the 5-1 rule, the 1 hour rule, how to find your main purpose in life, why intuition doesn't work for 95% of the population. I have all of these strategies, tips, tools built into the Rich Kids book that came from the research. So is
it for kids, or do you think, my wife and I, we don't have any kids, so is it something that I would read, or is it for people, or is it for parents?
No, it's really for everyone. It's all of the success strategies that I uncovered, but because I realize how important mentoring is, I created a book that will help people become mentors. Now, you can become a mentor to yourself by reading the book, because all the strategies are the same, whether you're a kid or an adult. They apply to anyone. So yeah, it's where Rich Habits was really the market for Rich Habits was really for people who are into self-help books and want to better their lives and improve their station in life. Rich Kids is that group plus parents, plus grandparents, plus teachers, and plus kids.
Now, I want to spend a couple minutes here coming up about Rich Habits, and maybe give us a handful of your best ones. But you had mentioned before on James's show that you took Rich Habits, and it is very story focused. It takes you along a story, but you're also coming out with one where it's more data driven and statistics and some of your results. That one sounds awesome to me, because I would love to read all of the statistics. That's just my personality. When is that one coming out?
Yeah, that's probably the next book. I have two more books that I'm after the Rich Kids book comes out. Rich Thinking. I think the thinking part, the belief system, changing your belief system helps change the habits. So I'm gonna focus on that one. And then I think I might jump to the I guess you could call it the new and improved Rich Habits. The original manuscript for Rich Habits really read like the Millionaire Next Door. It was like 500 pages. It had charts, it had graphs, it had data, all the stats.
See, that sounds awesome to me,
Yeah,
but I know some people are just glazing over just thinking about it.
yeah. The problem is that I sent it off to a bunch of people who I really value their opinion, and they almost every single one of them said, "Well, this is a great book for a college student because it's almost like a college book." And it was written, I wrote it at the college grade level. And they all said, "But who are you trying to help?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to help poor people." And he said, "Well, they all said the same thing. You're missing the boat on this if you're trying to help poor people. You've got to really engage the reader, and you're not going to engage them with all these stats and all this data." So I actually threw away that manuscript, and one of the people sent me, along with their criticism, which was kind of brutal. They sent me a book called "The Greatest Salesman in the World" by Og Mandino, and they said, "That's your book." So I read that book about 10 times, and then it just hit me one day, the whole format of the book. And so I got to work, and 6 months later I had Rich Habits. So the new and improved Rich Habits is going to be the Rich Habits versus the Poverty Habits. I'm going to include all the data in there, all the stats. I might cap it at like 50 to 100 of the habits, and just go because otherwise it'll be too big a book and people won't read it. And just go through each one of them line by line and show the stats. And I think a lot of the people who and there's 20% of the people on Amazon that wanted more stats and data. I think that 20% will be happy with that book, because it's something that I talk a lot about it on the radio and TV. So when I talk about it and then they read Rich Habits, they say, "Well, this is really more of it doesn't have all the stats. It has all the habits in there, but it doesn't. We want the meat on the bone." And so that's I'm going to do that probably after my Rich Thinking book. I'm guessing.
Yeah, like I said, that's one I'm definitely looking forward to, because I like numbers and all that stuff. A lot of people hate, but you also said something, and I've heard you say this before, is who is your target audience? You wanted to help poor people become rich. Now, I'm sure you've thought about this, but one of the things, well, I know you've thought about it because I know what you're about to say because of the statistics part. Poor people don't read a whole lot. So why come out with a book about being rich when poor people don't necessarily read?
Well, my thinking was, I knew that that poor people, based on my statistics, they don't read like wealthy people do. And when they do read, it's usually recreational reading. That's a stat that I have. They do engage in reading, but it's recreational. So I said, wow, if I can combine recreational reading with the habits, the self-improvement, then maybe I can get to these people. That was my objective. But of course, I was wrong. I do get some people that, who are struggling. The readers, they write me, they email me. I probably get 2 to 3 to 4 a day. And I'd say half of them are poor or struggling financially. They have something going wrong in their life. But the other half are generally middle-class people to successful people who are reading the book. So I do know that I missed the mark on that to some extent. But my heart was in the right place. I having been poor, I have an empathy for poverty and people that are struggling. So, it's sometimes you do certain things, the right things, and you just cross your fingers and you hope. And that's why the book, by the way, is written in the 6th grade reading level, which was, I'm not saying that was hard for me to do. I came from an Irish Catholic family with 8 people in it. So, sometimes the language wasn't a college language in our house. So I kind of had the ability to bring myself down to the level where I thought it would be intelligible and easy to understand. And it also is less than 90 pages, which is a lot smaller than the 400, 500 word manuscript that I had, 400, 500 word page manuscript that I had originally had. So I think that once Rich Habits is starting to really get some traction, I see it on Amazon. It's every day there's a lot of sales going through. So I know people are buying it.
Heck yeah.
And I'm guessing that a percentage of them are people that are struggling financially.
Well, you had said something about missing the mark, and that's not what I meant. I didn't even want to imply that, and I don't want you to think that, because I've offered I've got a $30 ebook about personal branding. I put it out there for like 2 weeks, and I said it's only $1, and it's $1 because I would lose money because PayPal would take fees. So it's out there for $1. Nobody bought it at $1. And you've got this fantastic resource, this fantastic book, and call them rich, poor, middle class, whatever. So a lot of people, again, to go back to what I said a second ago, is the poor stay poor because they keep doing the things that made or that would keep them poor or make them poor. And you can put out a big tub of water, but you can't make the horse drink it. And you have a great resource, but if I'm more focused on reading the Hunger Games instead of a 94-page book that has the study of 500 rich and poor people and boils down to all the great habits that they've done, well, you can't really complain about where you are if you're not willing to put in at least a little bit of work to read 94 pages. I mean, you could probably knock that out in 3 or 4 hours.
Yep.
And so let's go through some of the book. I thought it was longer, and then you said 90 or ish, and I pulled it up on Amazon here. It's gotten 115 reviews, 4+ stars out of 5. I mean, I seriously cannot wait to read it myself. Go through do you have a top 10 list or a top 5 of these habits or of the rich and the poor?
Oh, sure.
Can you share those?
Yeah. The first rich habit is, I call it the reinvention habit. It's really the starting point in changing your habits. And what I teach in the book is, look, what you want to do is, this is about self-assessment. You want to change. So you put down on a piece of paper in one column all of the habits, the bad habits that you really know are holding you back in life. And you list them all. And then I show in the book how you can take those bad habits. Like, for example, a lot of people watch too much TV. The average adult watches about 4 hours of TV a day. And most of that is recreational TV, So if that's one of your bad habits, you're spending too much time on the couch watching TV, your new rich habit would be, I watched less than 1 hour of TV a day, which seems to be the number that wealthy people that they watch less than an hour a day. So if your new rich habit is, I watched less than 1 hour of TV a day, that's a rich habit, because you just transformed a poverty habit into a rich habit. And if you smoke cigarettes, your new rich habit would be, I didn't smoke a cigarette today. If you eat too much, if you overeat and eat too much junk food, your new rich habit would be, I ate less than 300 junk food calories today. So you customize your own rich habit checklist by looking at your poverty habits, and you kind of create the opposite habit. So now you have this checklist, and I know I have people that have done this and they're having success. I was just on a phone call with a woman who read my book, and she lost 31 pounds. She's changing all of her habits, and she's happier, and things are going well in her life. She customized her own rich habits checklist, and she's following it every day. And they don't take that much time. Oftentimes it's just 15 to 30 minutes a day for example, the self-education reading. The wealthy people, they engaged in that, and poor people didn't, 30 minutes a day. So if you say include a new rich habit to read 15 to 20 minutes a day, something educational to help you, well, that's your new rich habit. So that's one of them. Setting goals. The goal setting is so critical, because it's particularly long-term goals. and I'm talking about a big goal that you want in life. When you set a long-term goal, what it does is it's usually associated with a dream or a major purpose in life that you stumbled on, and it completely transforms your behavior because it forces you to do certain things every day in pursuit of that long-term goal. So goal setting is critical. And the other thing I found out in my research from the wealthy is that I had the wrong definition of a goal. A lot of people will say, well, my goal is to make an additional $50,000 a year. That's, according to the wealthy in my study, that's not a goal, that's a wish. A goal is only a goal if it has two things. One, it has to have some physical activity associated with it. And the second thing it has to have is 100% achievability. You have to be able to accomplish the goal. Otherwise, with the activity. So you essentially define the activity that will help you achieve the goal. And every day that activity becomes the goal. So you have this long-term goal, and then you have these activities that you need to accomplish in order to reach the long-term goal. So you have to have those two things in order for a goal to be a goal. Otherwise, it's just a wish. And then self-improvement, engaging in self-improvement every day, the self-education, that's critical. And caring for your health, the aerobic exercise seems to be the exercise du jour of the wealthy. And the reasons they gave is because aerobic exercise helps feed oxygen to the body, primarily the brain. The brain uses up about 80% of the oxygen that we take in every day. So when you're engaging in aerobic exercise, you're actually creating new neurons. They're created in the hypothalamus every day. When you engage in exercise, aerobic exercise in particular, where oxygen is fed into the brain, it's like putting your brain on steroids. So you create all these new neurons, you create all these new neural pathways, all these new axons, and then you create these neurons communicating with each other. So that's why being healthy, aerobic exercise is so critical. It helps improve the metabolism. It helps keep the weight down. All this is important, Ellery, because when you're engaging in healthy habits, the byproduct of that is fewer sick days and more energy, and those translate into more productivity on the job, which means more money, more success on the job.
Yeah, I notice whenever I go walking with my wife Ashley, I get a lot of ideas about 10 or 15 minutes into a walk, and it's just you're breathing more, you're getting the oxygen brought into your brain, like you said. Now, I want to ask you a question though, Tom. Are these habits that made people rich, or are they habits that people had after they have become rich? Is it a chicken egg cart before the horse kind of thing, or what's the relationship there?
That's a great question. I'll answer that by this a story about this wealthy person who was about 68 years old. He was worth about $17 million. He was in my study. None of the wealthy people or the poor people in my study knew they were in a study, by the way. So I asked this individual who was wealthy, I said, look, you're 68 years old. You're worth $17 million. And yet you still are working every day. Why don't you retire and enjoy your money and travel and do all the fun things in life that a lot of people think is, what makes you happy. And he looked at me like I was from Mars. He said to me, he goes, Tom, for the last 40 plus years, I've been engaging in aerobic exercise. He was doing like jogging, and then it became, during the winter, he was doing the treadmill, and then it became the Stairmaster, the elliptical, as technology evolved. And he said, and I've been watching what I eat every day, because I knew while he was doing it, he wasn't rich. He said, I knew that towards the end of my career was the more likely to be the higher earning part of my career. And he happened to be in the insurance business. And he said, so I was looking at it from the perspective of if I could squeeze out another 4 or 5 years, and this guy made about $1 million to $1.5 million a year. If I could squeeze out another 4 or 5 years, that's another $5 or $6 million that I'm going to make. And so I still wasn't getting it, Ellery. So I said, but that's great. So now you have 20 million after taxes. You have 20 million instead of 17. I still don't understand. How are you going to spend that? And he looked at me again and he said, Tom, I have no intention of spending it. But what I do know is that money is going to be able to put my great-grandchildren through college. It's going to enable my great-grandchildren to go to private schools. It's going to give them opportunities I never had to be successful in life. So his thing, what was driving him was this legacy for his descendants down.
Good word.
Yeah.
Good word. So I interviewed a guy named J.V. Crum III, and he wrote a book called The Conscious Millionaire. And I asked him at the end of that episode, I would encourage everyone to listen to it. I said, JV, you've made all this money. You've been a millionaire for a very, very long time. Have you ever said to yourself, I'm going to let somebody else have their turn? And I kind of guessed what he would say because I've studied millionaires some. I've done a lot of personal development. But I asked him the question anyway. And Tom, I guess he would have turned to me if we were across the table, but he was off in Florida somewhere. He says, Ellery, not at all, because the more money I make, the more I can help other people. And that also comes from a mindset of scarcity instead of a mindset of abundance. Would you agree, Tom, that that's kind of what your example
I actually
was saying?
You're triggering something in my mind that's important, and part of the Rich Kids book is this mentoring. A lot of the wealthy, successful people were great mentors. They helped people who. So
they were mentors, and not just. They didn't just have mentors, but they also turned around and became mentors.
That's right.
Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Interesting.
They what do they call it nowadays? Play it forward or pay it forward. Well,
okay.
How they looked at it, wealthy people, was, look, it's. I can give someone a fish and they can eat for a day, or I can teach them how to fish. So they helped people become successful. Usually a lot of these individuals who were successful were in a position of control in either they're working for a big company or in their business. And they got to that position of authority by having these rich habits. So now they have all these lessons that they learned in life, that they were mentored by somebody else, or they learned through the School of Hard Knocks, and then they're teaching it to other people. They're more than happy to mentor anyone that's interested, because you're a wealthy person, you have all this money, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy. When you're teaching people how to be successful in life, the wealthy by far said that was one of the things that made them very happy, is mentoring other people. So this is something I see it in these nonprofit organizations that I joined after I found that was one of the rich habits. Wealthy people volunteered. So I joined a bunch of groups, nonprofit groups, and I met a lot of wealthy people, and they were always sharing advice and giving success tips, even if it had nothing to do with the nonprofit. That was just their nature. They wanted to pay it forward. So I saw it real time. I saw it actually working, and I learned a lot from joining those nonprofit groups.
Did you find any of the quote rich that did not mentor?
Yeah, there's a percentage of them that there was a group of the wealthy people that I consider it like everybody has rich habits and everybody has poverty habits. Mm-hmm. It's just that the wealthy people have more rich habits than poverty habits. But
that works.
not mentoring someone. I kind of look at that. I can't say it's a poverty habit, but it is a not the right thing to do. So yeah, wealthy people had a mix of some of these poverty habits, unfortunately, and I would say that being selfish and not sharing your success, your secrets to success, your rich habits with other people, I would consider that to be a violation of the relationship rich habit. Wealthy people, they seem to be obsessed with developing strong, valuable relationships and surrounding themselves with other successful people. That's the rich habit number 5. And so, there were some in my study that just, they weren't good at rich habit number 5. But the majority,
but they were good at the other ones.
They were good at the other ones. And, not everyone had the 10 rich habits. So, but I'll tell you this, the wealthy people had 6 or more of,
interesting.
60% or more than 50% for sure. And that got their success. I call it the success seesaw of life. They got their success seesaw tipping in the right direction when you get above the 50% of your habits are rich habits. That's when you start to see success start to happen. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's like snowflakes on a mountainside, these rich habits. They just keep accumulating and accumulating. And at some point in life, you have what I call an avalanche of success event. And it might be a bonus. It might be a promotion. It might be a big customer that you land or something like that.
Tom, can I ask you how many of those top 10 that you have?
Sure. I can tell you in 2007, I didn't have many. I had, going into this research, I probably had 2. The aerobic exercise, I was always an athlete. So I exercised. I ran all the time. I just like running. It helps, like meditation for me. And I also had the rich habit of self-education. I was a reader. But the relationships, I didn't have that one. I wasn't good at building strong, valuable relationships. I never knew about the happy birthday calls, the life event calls, the hello calls. I didn't know about networking. I really didn't. I hated networking. The volunteering.
And those are all detailed in the Rich Habits book?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I want to ask you a few questions that I try to ask everybody, but at this point, I want to encourage everybody to go and check out that book. I think there'll be a link in the show notes, but if you search Rich Habits on Amazon, 94 pages, it was like $12, and right. I am definitely going to read that one, probably the kids and the other one too, because I want to know, like you mentioned, the birthday call and some of these other ones. You went into detail on some on James Kinson's podcast. The link to that, everybody, will be in the show notes for this episode. So go and listen to that one. Support James and Tom by listening to that one. Buy the book. But Tom, I always try to ask people a handful of questions towards the very end. And I want to ask you those because I know you're going to have some fantastic answers to at least one of these. So being on the Empowered podcast, I always try to ask, what does the word empower mean to you?
I think empower means to have gain some control over your life, and I think it's one of the important happiness traits that wealthy people have. I think it's one of the things that creates the most happiness or unhappiness when you don't feel like you have control over your life. When I think you don't feel empowered, you feel like somebody else has control over you. And so I think empowered to me means when you are doing certain things every single day and it makes you feel like you have control over your destiny.
I love that. And there was an event, maybe there was a specific event or maybe it was just a general transition in your life, but a few years ago you started making this transition. You started making this research, and maybe it was that guy in your office that had broke down. But how did you empower yourself, or to use your words, how did you put yourself in control to make the changes necessary from, I can't remember if you said 2007 or 2009, but over the last 5 to 8 years, how did you empower yourself to make the changes necessary to get where you are today, being on Dave Ramsey's show, Fox, CNN, Entrepreneur, all of these other things?
Yeah, I have to tell you, the first thing that happened after completing this research, even before the book was even on the radar, was my mindset, my thinking shifted. My belief structure was really shaking at the very foundation. I realized, my gosh, all of my beliefs are limiting beliefs. I've really felt that once I was done with the research. And that's why one of the rich habit number 8 is rich thinking. When I was writing that rich habit out, when I was trying to explain it. It was really, to me, it was the metamorphosis that takes place when you start following these rich habits. It completely rattles your belief system, and it challenges all those limiting beliefs that you've accepted. Like, for example, I'm poor, and I'm going to be poor for the rest of my life. That's just the way it is. Some people are born rich. Some people are born poor. I was born poor. Boy, that limiting belief is the opposite of right. And that's kind of one that I had. I said, I can help get myself to the middle class. And I did. And trust me, the self-education helped get me there and helped me raise my family. But that limiting belief just completely crumbled. And once I realized, my gosh, I can become wealthy. A lot of these people in my study were not from wealthy households. A lot of them weren't wealthy growing up, but they became wealthy. So
85 to 88%.
Yeah, 87% of all of wealthy people are first generation rich. That's important.
Wow.
Because
that's pretty good odds, though. If I'm sitting there like, man, guys, I'm broke, I'm poor, but 87% of people who are rich started off in a similar position to me. Yeah. I mean, I'd go to Vegas with those odds. That's a bad example because
the problem, Ellery, is we're looking at the 87%. The real stat is that between 3 and 5% break out of poverty or the middle class and rise to become wealthy. That's the real troubling statistic. And it's because so that 87%, they came from poor or middle class backgrounds. But of all of the pie of poor people and middle class people, only 3 to 5% actually break out. And the reason they break out is because I'm convinced now it's all about your daily habits. You change your daily habits, you change your belief system, and then you have this metamorphosis that takes place. There's no other way to phrase it. You then are able to look at yourself differently and say, well, I believe I can become wealthy if I do certain things every single day. I'm going to get there. And it's like climbing a ladder rung by rung. But if you persist and are focused, these rich habits, I've seen it in my research, and I'm seeing it in my life. It's transforming my life. Like I said, for most of my life, I was poor. And now, I guess you consider me affluent, but I'm not wealthy yet. But I've only been following these things really since 2007. Certainly I lost 41 pounds in 2007 to 8 from following some of the strategies that the wealthy use to lose weight. So I think my income has gone up, and it's not from the royalties. It's really from shifting. It forced me to shift my the way I do business, and I shifted more into those areas that where you can make more money. And that was an epiphany that happened after I finished the research. I said, I'm going to go into financial planning a little bit more. And I made more money. I made, $100,000 more a year in some years, some more, some less. But I didn't have that 100,000 additional income before. So I know that these rich habits work. And I applied those rich habits, to the financial planning like I was a maniac. The developing relationships, the hello call. In fact, the hello call and the life event call made me $60,000 in 3 hours, and that is the truth. I met someone at a networking event, again, a rich habit that I adopted, and he was a number 2 guy at a big pharmaceutical here in New Jersey. I started making hello calls, which are reconnaissance missions. You're just gathering information. Eventually, I made what's called a life event call that had to do with his kid in the newspaper and a basketball free throw shooting contest. And the next thing I knew, I was doing a rollover of his old 401k, and I made $60,000. And I said, that coupled with an insurance guy in one of my learning sessions who made $150,000 in 1 year from following the rich habits. Those two things made me realize I needed to get this down in writing and share it with the world.
Man, I have so we're running out of time, and I have so many questions that I just want to dig deeper on every single one of these. But maybe another time. But I want to clarify something. You had said 87% of the people who were rich came from being poor, but only 3 to 5% of the poor become rich, and I think that's interesting statistic. It'd be like 3 to 5% of the population can become pro basketball players or something,
Right.
but the people who are pros, that's a terrible. I shouldn't even have done that one, but can you explain that one just a little bit more
Yeah.
clearly for me?
Yeah, if you're looking at the pie, let's make believe that the rich people represent a pizza pie, right?
Okay.
So you'd have probably 1 slice to 1.5 slices out of that pizza pie where those wealthy people actually came from wealth. They're the rich get richer. Well, they're rich people who continue to be rich. Their kids continue to be rich, and because they have a lot of money, they can do certain things. But the other 6.5 slices of that pie, they came from poor or middle class households. Now that's one pie. Now there's this other huge pie that's the size of a neighborhood that represents
It's a much bigger
poor
pie.
and middle class people. Well, out of that pie, there's a bite of that pizza, of one slice of that pizza, that moves over to that rich pie, and that's the 87%. That little bite of pizza, when you put it into the smaller size pizza, it represents 87% of the wealthy. So even though there's a few number percentage of people from the poor and the middle class that make it to wealth, the pie that represents the wealth, most of them, 87% of them, came from poor or middle class backgrounds.
I got you. And here's the question I've been waiting to ask you. That's one of my standards, Tom. What is something that you have stopped doing that has helped you get where you are today?
I would say that it's a couple of things. One is I stopped overeating. I always exercised, but I ate too much. So I knocked out the junk food, and so I stopped overeating, I guess is one of them. And the other thing I did was I stopped my negative thinking. I stopped beating myself up and criticizing myself, and I changed my programming from negative to positive. Those are I think the worst thing I did was, and it's part of my old belief structure, was I just had a negative mindset because I guess of my upbringing, and that comes from all the negative stuff that went on in my life. So I my outlook right now is positive, upbeat. I practice optimism. I practice gratitude every day. It stops the negative old programming from rearing its head again. So I would say that changing my thinking was the most important thing, and then also changing the way I ate was the second most.
Interesting. Very interesting. Tom, what was the last movie you saw?
I think it was Argo.
That's a good movie, actually.
Yeah.
That was a while back. What, about a year or so ago? Do you not watch movies? Is that one of the things that you kind of cut out, or you just
No?
do
I
other
am
things?
a big science fiction fan, so any science
There you go.
fiction. I guess when I said movie, I meant in the movie theater. But I'm always watching, renting on the TV, science fiction movies. So I think that Pacific Rim was probably the most recent movie that I watched on TV.
I like that
Oh,
one.
that was awesome. I just like the science fiction because it gets your imagination going.
Yeah, and I was watching Dexter last night, and this lady says the best hobbies are the ones that take us furthest away from, what we do on a regular basis, and sci-fi is kind of that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to go flying around space and everything, but it seems to be very far away from what I do on a normal basis. Anyway, my last question for you, Tom, other than connecting with you, is what is one tip or piece of advice that you can give people like me, people like our listeners, people who are reading your book? What's one tip or piece of advice that you can give us to help us be rich or successful or something like that?
I will tell you, engage in 30 minutes or more of reading for education purposes. I think that is a real critical. And the other tip I'll give you is we all have a relationship seesaw. You want to limit what I call the poverty relationships. Those are the ones that are dragging you down. Those are the people that always are negative. They have problems going on in their lives. They always reach out to you when they have a problem and they need your help. You want to limit your contact with your poverty relationships to less than an hour a week, and you want to increase the time you spend with your rich relationships, those other successful people, to more than an hour a week. That gets the relationship seesaw tipping in the right direction.
I love that advice, and I've heard something very similar in it, and it's fantastic to hear it again, because it's a hard choice. We don't have time to get into how difficult that could be, but it's so valuable, and I want to thank you for sharing that with us. Tom, if someone wanted to reach out to you, thank you for being on the show, buy your book, or send you a tweet or something, where can I send them to connect with you?
Sure. They can email me at tom@richhabits.net. And they can, if they go on my website, richhabits.net, they'll also, there's a contact page there. And while they're there, they can download all sorts of free reports and ebooks that I have. They can make contact with me that way too.
Perfect. I will put a link to that in the show notes, everybody, which you can find at empoweredpodcast.com. Tom, thank you so much for being on the show today. I had an absolute blast and learned quite a bit in the process. So thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Ellery, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Man, I really am glad that Tom said 87% of wealthy people today are first generation rich, because that's so encouraging to me. Almost 100%. I mean, we're going to look at 87 versus 100. It's practically everybody who is rich today was not born into money. They weren't, they didn't inherit something. They didn't get a trust fund or, whatever the terms are. They built their money. And that's encouraging to me, because I want to build something with my podcast, my blog, and my online business and those things. And I hope that's encouraging to you too. You can do it too. So the only question that I have in my head right now is, what's stopping us? What's stopping you from being rich? Now, before you start thinking, well, it's not just about money, Ellery. You know that. I know that. And I know that. If you've listened to any of my podcasts, it's not just all about money. And I truly believe that being rich or being wealthy is about freedom as well. I took a big pay cut to start my online business, and I have not been happier. Sure, there's some frustrations. Sure, there's some challenges. Things don't always go according to plan. It's not all roses and butterflies or whatever. But it's not all about the money. It's about the freedom. It's about feeling good about what you're contributing to the world, and, how you can spend time with your family. And so it's not only about rich habits versus poor habits. It's not only, money habits versus not having money habits. It's about just success and creating the life that you want. And that's what I want to create, or help you create. That's the life that I want for you. I want you to have a life of significance, a life of meaning, a life of passion, not just going to a concrete and steel building and just feeling like a number. And if you've listened to any of my interviews on, me being a guest on other people's shows, you hear me talk about that a lot. It's just not dreading waking up in the morning, not just ruining your Saturday or your Sunday afternoon because Monday's coming. And to me, that's what rich habits are, just the habits that will allow me to live the lifestyle that I want to live. If you are listening to this live, today is the Wednesday before the very first podcast movement. If you're listening to this today, tomorrow, Friday, or any time leading up to podcast movement, I cannot wait for this event. If you're going to be there, I want to meet you. I don't always get to meet guests of the show or friends that I've made online, and I'm looking forward to meeting a dozen or more people that I have met on, just through this online business stuff that I'm doing. If you're going to Podcast Movement, come and say hello to me. That would put the biggest smile on my face. I know my wife, Ashley, would love to see a real connection made with all these people that I'm Facebook chatting with and tweeting with and sending emails across the world with. I just want to meet you. I would love to give you a handshake or give you a big hug. Just let me know you listen to the show. Let me know if you listen or read the blog. I just would just thoroughly enjoy connecting with you. I do have to mention one other thing, though. The class that I teach online to start an online business, about all of the tools, the mindset, the resources that I use to create my online business, it's closing for the second class here in just a few days. So go to empoweredpodcast.com/expertise. That's empoweredpodcast.com/EXPERTISE. That's expertise, and enroll in that course. If you want to do what I do, sell ebooks, start a podcast, start building a brand online, enroll in that course and I'll teach you every single thing that I know, and I will do everything I possibly can to make you as successful as you possibly can be. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm Ellery Wells. Look forward to talking to you next time.